What if focusing only on yourself changed everything? Marcus Aurelius knew, turn inward for 30 days.
You sit in the quiet of your own room, perhaps late at night when the rest of the world has finally stopped demanding your attention. The day has left its residue. Small resentments that clung like dust, conversations you replayed too many times, glances from others that you weighed more heavily than they deserved, and now the silence presses in, not peaceful yet, but empty enough to let the real questions surface. You told yourself you would focus on yourself, not in the shallow way people mean when they say self-care bath, a new purchase, a weekend off, but in the older, harder sense. To turn your gaze inward with the same sustained attention you once gave to everyone else. 30 days. A number that sounds modest until the hours begin to stretch. You imagine something would happen. A shift, a revelation. Life rearranging itself around this single deliberate choice. But already on the first evening the discomfort arrives. It is not dramatic, no thunderclap of insight. Just a quiet recognition that when you stop scanning the horizon for approval, for correction, for signs that you are seen and measured correctly, the mind does not immediately fill the space with virtue. Instead, it rushes toward the familiar. What did she mean by that remark? Why hasn't he replied? Did I speak too sharply earlier? The old habits are not loud, they are persistent, like breath on glass. This is the first truth the 30 days will force you to meet. Most of what you call your life has, been constructed from the reactions of others. Not your actions, but your interpretations of their faces, their silences, their words. You have lived as a mirror, reflecting back what you believed they wanted, adjusting the angle until the reflection pleased them, or at least stopped displeasing them. To focus on yourself is to turn that mirror around. And what you see first is not a noble statue of self-mastery. It is a man who has spent years rehearsing lines for an audience that rarely applauded. Do not mistake this for self-pity. It is inventory. Seneca once wrote that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. He was not gentle when he said it. He meant that the greater part of our pain is manufactured by the mind's refusal to stay where the body is. You have spent decades training your imagination to live in other people's heads. Now when you try to call it home, it resists. It paces. It asks why the room feels so small, why no one is watching. Let it pace. The discipline begins here. Not with grand resolutions, but with refusal. Refusal to answer the old questions. Refusal to chase the next reassurance. Refusal to explain yourself to ghosts who are not even present. Each time the mind drifts outward, you must notice it not with anger, not with disappointment, but with the calm of a man who has caught a thief in his own house. You do not strike the thief. You simply bar the door again. In the beginning this feels like loss. Something essential has been taken. Away. The constant feedback loop that told you who you were. Without it, the self feels thin, almost weightless. You wonder whether focusing on yourself will make you smaller instead of larger. That fear is honest. Honor it. It proves the experiment is already working. Because the life you are about to watch change is not built on additions. It is built on subtractions. You subtract the habit of measuring your worth by how quickly others respond. You subtract the reflex to soften your edges so no one is inconvenienced. You subtract the silent bargain you made long ago. If I anticipate every need, if I absorb every slight without complaint, then perhaps I will be spared rejection. That bargain was never kept. It only grew more expensive. Now you pay attention to the cost. Each morning you wake, and the day lies ahead like an unmarked field. No one has yet told you what shape it should take. There is no script. The temptation is to fill the silence immediately, to reach for the phone, to check whether yesterday's conversation has been continued, to see whether your absence was noticed. Resist. Sit with the emptiness for 10 minutes, not meditating in the modern performative sense, simply sitting, feeling the urge rise and subside without following it. This is not tranquility you are practicing, it is restraint. The restraint of a man who knows that every impulse he obeys without question is another chain he forges for tomorrow. You will notice, perhaps on the third or fourth day, how much energy was spent maintaining the fiction that other people's opinions were facts about your character. Each time someone withdrew approval, you treated it as evidence of failure. Each time someone praised you, you treated it as proof of progress. Both were mirages. The only enduring fact is the one you can verify in solitude. Did I act today from principle or from fear of being disliked? That question is merciless. It does not allow half answers. You begin to see the small lies you told yourself to keep the peace. I'll speak up next time. It doesn't matter that much. I'm fine with how things are. These were not kindnesses, they were deferrals. You deferred living your own life so that others could live theirs undisturbed. The 30 days are the end of that deferral. Do not expect gratitude. The world does not reward the man who stops playing his assigned role. At first it barely notices. Later it may resent the change. That resentment is not your burden to carry. Your task is narrower, to remain present to yourself when everything else pulls you away. In the quiet hours you will meet the parts of yourself you once drowned out with noise. The anger you swallowed because it was inconvenient. The ambition you disguised as humility. The grief you refused because it would have demanded time. These are not enemies. They are citizens of the same city you govern. To focus on yourself means to govern them justly, not to banish them, not to indulge them, but to give, each its proper hearing and its proper limit. This governance is exhausting at first. The mind is not used to being ruled by reason instead of reflex. It rebels. It offers distractions, justifications, sudden waves of nostalgia for the old chaos. Meet each rebellion with the same steady refusal. You are not trying to become perfect. You are trying to become responsible. Responsibility in the Stoic sense is not guilt. It is ownership. You own your judgments. You own your desires. You own the way you allow the external world to shape your inner one. No one else can carry that weight for you. When you finally accept it, something strange happens. The days begin to lengthen, not because time itself changes, but because you stop leaking it in every direction. 30 days is not magic. It is a container, a bounded space in which you can observe what happens when attention is no longer divided. Already you sense the first faint shift, not ecstasy, not triumph, just a small, stubborn clarity. The man in the mirror is no longer waiting for permission to exist. He is simply here, and for the first time in years, that is enough to begin the day. You have carried the first days like stones in your pocket, small, unnoticed at first, then heavier with each step. The initial discomfort has settled into something steadier, not peace, but presence. You are no longer fleeing inward only to be pulled outward again by the next notification, the next imagined judgment, the mirror you turned. You. Around still shows a face you do not entirely recognize, but you have stopped flinching from it. Now the real pressure begins. In these middle days, the mind tests its new boundaries the way a prisoner tests bars, not with violence, but with quiet, repeated pressure. You catch yourself crafting explanations before anyone has asked for them. You rehearse apologies for choices you have not yet made. The old reflex returns. If I just frame this right, if I soften it enough, perhaps no one will be disappointed. And each time the thought arises, you feel the familiar tightening in the chest, the body remembering what the mind is trying to unlearn. This is where discipline reveals its true face, not as heroic effort, but as patient refusal repeated until refusal becomes habit. You begin to notice how much of your previous self-focus was counterfeit. You thought solitude was enough, a few hours alone, a journal entry, a walk without headphones. But solitude without restraint is merely isolation, it changes nothing. The mind can be alone in a crowd and still live entirely for others, replaying their words, anticipating their needs, scripting conversations that may never happen. True focus on yourself demands something sterner, the deliberate exclusion of everything that is not yours to govern. Consider the small daily decisions that once passed without scrutiny. The tone you used when someone interrupted you, not because you were angry, but because you feared silence would be read as weakness. The way you laughed a little too readily at jokes that cut. The habit of asking, "Is that okay?" when stating a simple preference. Each was a concession, a quiet payment to keep the social machinery running smoothly. Now, when the impulse rises to concede again, you pause, not to debate, not to justify, just to notice. The pause itself is the discipline. In that space between impulse and action, you reclaim territory that was never truly lost, only lent out. Seneca spoke of the man who lives as though every day were his last, not in frantic indulgence, but in measured possession of his own hours. You are beginning to understand what he meant. When you stop lending your attention to the endless committee of other people's expectations, time thickens. An hour spent reading or walking, or simply sitting becomes an hour that belongs to you, not borrowed from someone else's approval. The change is subtle, almost imperceptible at first. A conversation ends, and instead of immediately reviewing what you said wrong, you simply let it end. The silence that follows is not empty. It is yours. Yet this ownership brings its own discomfort. Without the constant external reference, identity feels unsteady. Who are you when no one is reflecting you back? The question is not philosophical, it is visceral. You feel moments of vertigo as though the ground has dropped an inch. In those moments, the temptation is strong to reach outward again, to text, to call, to post something that might, draw response and remind you of your outline. Resist. The resistance is not about becoming cold or detached. It is about becoming selective. You learn to distinguish between connection and dependence. Connection requires two people standing on their own ground. Dependence requires one to lean so heavily that the other must brace himself. For years you have been the one leaning, and the strain has shown in small ways. Fatigue that has no clear source, irritation at trivial things, a low-grade resentment toward those you helped most. Now you stand straighter, not out of pride, but out of necessity. The body follows the mind's new posture. Around the 10th or 12th day, a different pressure emerges, not from outside, but from within. The parts of yourself you once ignored begin to speak more clearly. The anger that was always reasonable in hindsight but never permitted in the moment. The desires you labeled selfish because they did not serve others first. The ambitions you buried under layers of realism and humility. These are not sudden revelations, they are recognitions of what has been there all along, muffled by the noise of accommodation. To focus on yourself means to listen to them without immediately judging or indulging. You sit with the anger and ask, what boundary was crossed? You sit with the desire and ask, what would honoring this actually require? You sit with the ambition and ask, is this mine, or is it a reaction to someone else's measure of success? Listening is slow work. It cannot be rushed. Each answer arrives like stone being shaped by water, not through force, but through persistent, quiet pressure. You will fail at this listening many times. The mind will hurry to old conclusions. I shouldn't feel this way. This is petty. Others have it worse. When that happens, do not fight the judgment. Simply notice that judgment itself is another way of avoiding responsibility. Instead of arguing with the feeling, return to the question. What is true here, regardless of how it makes me look? This return is the core practice of the 30 days. Not a technique to master, but a rhythm to inhabit. Feel to notice, to return. Again and again. Each cycle wears down the old pathways a little more. By now, the external world has begun to register the shift, even if it cannot name it. People may comment that you seem different, more distant perhaps, or more certain. Some will like it, some will not. A few will test the change, probing for the old compliance. When they do, you will feel the pull to revert, to explain, to reassure, to smooth the moment over. The pull is strong because it once kept you safe, but safety bought at the price of self-erasure is no safety at all. You answer from the new ground. Not harshly, not defensively, simply from the place that no longer apologizes for existing. No, I cannot do that. I prefer this. I will think about it. The words are ordinary, the weight behind them is not. Each time you speak, then without flinching, another small chain falls away. The days accumulate, not as a streak to be proud of, but as evidence. Evidence that attention is finite, and when it is no longer scattered, it grows concentrated. Evidence that restraint is not deprivation, but preservation. Evidence that the life-changing is not the one outside you, the job, the relationships, the circumstances, but the one inside. The man who has stopped outsourcing his sovereignty. You are halfway now. The mirror no longer shows a stranger. It shows someone who is learning, slowly, to govern his own city. The governance is imperfect. Rebels still stir in the side streets. Old alliances try to reassert themselves, but the walls hold. And in the center, in the quiet forum of your own judgment, decisions are being made that were once unthinkable, not because you have become stronger in some theatrical sense, but because you have stopped being divided. The change is already underway, not loud, not complete, but undeniable. And the remaining days will only deepen it. You reach the point where the 30 days no longer feel like an experiment. They have become the ordinary shape of your hours. The initial vertigo has passed, replaced by a quieter unease, not the fear of losing yourself, but the realization that you are finding more of yourself than you knew existed. And what you find is not always comfortable company. The mind, once so eager to scatter, now lingers. It lingers on choices you made long ago, without fully meaning them. On promises you kept to others while quietly breaking them to yourself. On mornings you rose not for your own reasons, but because someone somewhere might notice if you did not. These recollections arrive without drama, like old letters discovered in a drawer. You read them, and the handwriting is unmistakably yours. This is the deeper layer of the change. Responsibility no longer feels abstract. It settles in the body as a kind of gravity. You cannot any longer pretend that your acquiescence was noble, that your silence was wisdom, that your constant adjustment was love. It was strategy. Survival strategy, perhaps necessary once, but prolonged far beyond its usefulness. Now the strategy has become the problem. You notice how often you still anticipate criticism that never arrives. A decision is made simple, yours, and the old forecast plays. They will think I'm selfish. They will withdraw. They will tell others I've changed for the worse. The forecast runs its course and nothing follows. No message, no cold shoulder. Just the ordinary silence of people living their own lives. In that silence you see the truth. Most of what you feared losing was never truly yours to lose. It was borrowed attention, and borrowed attention always comes with interest paid in exhaustion, in resentment, in the slow erosion of self-trust. To focus on yourself is to stop paying that interest. The days now carry a different texture. Decisions accumulate like small stones. You building a wall. You say no to an invitation not because you dislike the people, but because the time it would take belongs to something else you have chosen. You express a preference without dressing it in qualifiers. You allow a disagreement to stand without rushing to repair it. Each act is minor in itself, yet together they redraw the map of your day. The center of that map is no longer the approval of others. It is the quiet alignment between what you think and what you do. This alignment is not effortless. The mind still offers compromises. Just this once, to keep the peace. It's not worth the friction. You hear the offers clearly now, and you decline them not out of stubbornness, but because you have begun to value inner coherence more than external harmony. Coherence is expensive. It requires you to bear the discomfort of being misunderstood, of being seen as less accommodating, of watching relationships adjust to the new weight of your presence. Some relationships bend. Some break. The breaking hurts, but the hurt is cleaner than the slow poison of pretense. Seneca wrote that we should live as though the wise man were watching not to perform virtue, but to keep our actions accountable to our own best judgment. You begin to feel what that means in practice. When the impulse comes to soften a truth, you ask, would I say this if no one else would ever know? The answer is often no. And when it is not, you do not force the harder words out. You simply withhold the softening. The restraint itself becomes the statement. Around the 20th day, self-mastery stops being a concept and starts being a felt experience. You wake and the first thought is not about what others might require of you today, but what you require of yourself. The shift is small, almost unremarkable, yet it changes everything. Tasks that once felt like obligations now feel like choices. Even the mundane ones, rising early, eating deliberately, walking without distraction, carry the dignity of ownership. You are no longer a tenant in your own life. Yet mastery is never complete. The old reflexes do not vanish, they lie in wait. Fatigue arrives, and with it the temptation to revert, to seek comfort in familiar patterns, to outsource judgment to someone else's reaction. In those moments the discipline is not to conquer temptation, but to endure it without surrender. You sit with the pull, feel its strength and let it pass. Not because you are stronger than the pull, but because you have learned that yielding to it costs more than resisting. You notice too how much identity was once invested in being needed, being the reliable one, the understanding one, the one who could be counted on to absorb tension without complaint. That role gave shape to your days, definition to your worth. Now that shape is dissolving, and in its place comes something less defined but more solid, a man who is present without needing to be indispensable. Presence without indispensability is, freedom of a kind you did not expect. You no longer measure your value by how much others lean on you. You measure it by how steadily you stand for yourself. The difference is profound. Where dependence once created a false intimacy, true presence creates space for others to stand on their own ground, space for you to walk yours without apology. The external world continues its motion. Some people drift closer, drawn by the quiet certainty they sense. Others drift away, unsettled by the change in gravitational pull. You do not chase either movement. You simply observe it, the way one observes weather. The weather is not yours to command. Your task is to remain steady beneath it. In the quiet of these later days, self-awareness sharpens into something almost surgical. You see the precise moments where you once traded principle for peace. You see how often being reasonable was code for being convenient. You see the ways in which delayed gratification was never truly delayed, it was denied altogether, postponed indefinitely in favor of immediate relational equilibrium. Each recognition stings, but the sting is medicinal. It cleans the wound of self-deception. You do not punish yourself for these discoveries. Punishment would be another form of avoidance. Instead, you accept them as part of the inventory. They are yours. You own them. And in owning them, you begin to release their hold. The life that is changing is not the one of dramatic events. It is the life of steady orientation toward what is yours to control, toward what endures beyond the mood of the moment or the opinion of the day, toward the man who 30 days ago decided to stop living as a reflection and start living as a source. That decision was not heroic. It was necessary. And necessity, once acknowledged, becomes the surest path. The remaining days will not bring perfection. They will bring deeper habituation, deeper trust in your own judgment, deeper tolerance for the discomfort that attends any real growth. You are no longer waiting to see what happens. You are happening. You have passed the midpoint where the 30 days felt like a deliberate practice. Now the practice has begun to feel like the natural order of your hours. What once required conscious effort, the pause before responding, the refusal to explain yourself into corners, the quiet return to your own judgment has settled into something closer to instinct. Not flawless instinct, but reliable enough that the old divisions no longer command the day. Yet this reliability brings its own test. The deeper you go into self-focus, the more clearly you see how much of your previous identity was borrowed architecture. Walls built from other people's expectations. Rooms furnished with their approvals and disapprovals. Doors left open so they could enter at will. You did not notice the borrowing because it felt like belonging. Now the structure stands exposed, functional once, perhaps protective, but never truly yours. To live inside it any longer would be to remain a guest in your own life. Dismantling borrowed architecture is not dramatic demolition. It is deliberate, brick by brick removal. Each brick is a habit you once thought essential, the automatic yes to preserve harmony, the quick apology to preempt conflict, the careful calibration of tone so no one feels challenged. You lift them away one at a time, and the space widens. Light enters places long kept dim, but widening brings exposure. You feel the draft of your own unmediated presence. No buffer, no mediator, just the man you are, standing in the open. This exposure is the true crucible of the remaining days. Without the old buffers, every emotion, every judgment, every desire registers without dilution. Anger is no longer softened into reasonableness before it reaches consciousness. Desire is no longer immediately reframed as unreasonable. Grief, when it surfaces, is not hurried away with distractions or platitudes. You meet them directly because there is nowhere else for them to go. The meeting is not always gentle. Sometimes it is raw. Sometimes it reveals pettiness you would rather not own. Sometimes it reveals strength you had forgotten was yours. In these moments, the discipline shifts from refusal to containment. You do not suppress what arises. Suppression was the old way, pushing feelings down so others would not be inconvenienced by them. Now you contain them. You allow the full force without letting it spill into you. Action until reason has weighed it. Containment is harder than suppression because it requires staying with the discomfort instead of escaping it. You sit with the heat of resentment until it cools into clarity. You sit with the ache of unmet longing until it reveals what it actually asks for. You sit with the sting of shame until it loses its power to dictate. This sitting changes the quality of time. An afternoon that once passed in a blur of small accommodations now stretches into hours of deliberate presence. You read a page and actually follow the thought instead of skimming for what might impress someone later. You walk and notice the rhythm of your own breath instead of rehearsing conversations. You eat without the background hum of mental chatter about what others might think of your choices. These are not grand meditations. They are ordinary acts reclaimed from fragmentation. Around the 25th day, a subtle inversion occurs. You begin to notice that other people's lives, once the constant reference point, now appear more distant, not in hostility, but in proper proportion. Their dramas no longer pull at you like tides. Their opinions no longer arrive with the weight of verdict. You see them clearly, perhaps more clearly than before, because your vision is no longer clouded by the need to align with them. This clarity is not indifference. It is perspective. You can wish them well without needing to manage their weather. You can love without needing to merge. You can disagree without needing to convert. The freedom this brings is quiet, almost austere. You no longer spend energy anticipating needs that are not yours to meet. You no longer rehearse defenses against criticisms that may never come. The energy conserved accumulates. It shows in small ways. Sharper focus, steadier patience, a body that carries less chronic tension. You sleep more deeply because the mind no longer patrols the borders of other people's approval. You wake with purpose that does not depend on external validation. Yet the path is not without its shadows. There are hours when the old loneliness returns, not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of no longer being needed in the old way. The role of the indispensable fixer, the eternal accommodator, gave a shape to your days that felt like meaning. Without it, meaning must be forged anew. Forging is slower work. It requires asking questions you once avoided. What do I actually value when no one is watching? What would I pursue if approval were guaranteed to be withheld? What boundaries must I hold not for protection but for integrity? These questions do not arrive with fanfare. They arrive in the ordinary gaps, waiting for tea to steep, watching rain on the window, lying awake before dawn. You answer them not with declarations, but with choices repeated daily. The choice to speak truth when silence would be easier. The choice to rest when productivity would impress. The choice to remain silent when the explanation would soothe. Each choice is a brick in the new structure, one built for permanence, not for display. By now the 30 days have almost completed their arc. The change you set out to witness is no longer something you watch for. It is the ground beneath your feet. Not perfect ground, not unshakable, but firm enough to stand on without constant adjustment. You have subtracted the habits that divided you. You have added nothing dramatic in their place, only the steady practice of remaining undivided. Self-mastery in this light is not the absence of struggle. It is the presence of a man who no longer flees from his own struggle, who no longer outsources its resolution, who meets it with the same quiet authority he once reserved for managing everyone else's. The life that has changed is the inner one, the governance of thought, the restraint of impulse, the ownership of judgment. The outer life, relationships, work, circumstances will continue to shift in response, some alignments strengthening, some falling away. But those shifts are secondary now. The primary orientation is inward. You are no longer the mirror, you are the light. And in that light, the remaining hours of these 30 days carry a different weight, not of anticipation but of confirmation. What you set out to see has already begun to happen, not as spectacle, but as the slow, deliberate becoming of a man who has finally claimed his own ground. You stand now at the threshold of the 30th day. The number itself has lost its magic. It was never the point. The point was the sustained turning inward, the refusal to look away when the view became uncomfortable, the patient reclamation of what had been lent out for too long. 30 days was merely the container. What it held has already begun to reshape itself without fanfare. In these final hours, the change reveals its true nature. Not a transformation into someone new, but a return to someone who was always waiting beneath the layers of accommodation. You see him clearly now, not idealized, not heroic, but steady. A man who has learned that the greatest betrayal is not rejection by others, but self-abandonment in the name of peace. That betrayal ends here, not with a dramatic declaration, but with the quiet consistency of choices aligned to inner truth. The mind, once so restless in its search for external anchors, now rests more often in its own judgment. It still wanders. Old pathways do not vanish overnight, but the wandering no longer pulls you off course for long. You notice the drift, feel the familiar tug and return. The return has become almost automatic, like breath after a held sigh. This is self-mastery in its plainest form, not the elimination of impulse, but the swift, unemotional redirection of it. No celebration follows, no sense of victory. Only the calm knowledge that you are no longer governed by what once governed you. Look back without sentiment. The days when every interaction felt like an audition are fewer now. The nights when sleep was interrupted by imagined conversations have grown rarer. The habit of measuring worth by responsiveness, likes, replies, acknowledgements has loosened its grip, not because the world has changed, but because you have stopped using the world as a mirror. The mirror is internal now, and its surface is less distorted. It reflects what is, not what might please. Yet even this clarity carries its weight. To see yourself without the softening filter of others' approval means seeing the flaws without mitigation, the pettiness that lingers in quiet corners, the pride disguised as principle, the fear of irrelevance that sometimes still whispers when a day passes without external validation. These do not disappear. They simply lose their authority. You acknowledge them as part of the territory you govern, not as rulers of it. Governance requires neither denial nor indulgence, only honest assessment and measured response. In the stillness of these last days, responsibility deepens into something almost sacred. Not the burdensome responsibility once carried for everyone else's comfort, but the lighter, truer kind. Responsibility for the integrity of your own soul. You answer to yourself first, not out of arrogance but out of necessity. No one else can bear the consequences of your divided attention. No one else can repair the slow fracture that occurs when judgment is outsourced. This is the Stoic inheritance you have claimed not as doctrine but as live practice. The outer life continues its rhythm. Relationships adjust or do not. Some grow quieter, some grow clearer. Work proceeds without the old undercurrent of people-pleasing. Daily tasks carry the dignity of deliberate choice. None of it feels revolutionary. It feels earned. Each small alignment between thought and action reinforces the next. The reinforcement is cumulative, invisible in the single day, visible only across the span of weeks. You have watched life change not in sweeping gestures, but in the gradual closing of gaps. The gap between what you feel and what you express. The gap between what you desire and what you pursue. The gap between what you tolerate and what you accept. These closings are quiet. They require no witnesses. They require only your continued presence. Presence is the final lesson these 30 days have taught. Not presence as performance, not presence as mindfulness technique, but presence as the refusal to be absent from yourself. When you are present, impulse loses much of its power. When you are present, judgment sharpens without cruelty. When you are present, restraint becomes natural rather than forced. Presence is not the absence of conflict, it is the capacity to meet conflict without fragmentation. The man who began this journey was fragmented. He lived in pieces shaped to fit others' expectations, pieces held in reserve for approval, pieces sacrificed for harmony. Now the pieces draw closer together, not fused into perfection, but integrated enough that the cracks no longer leak vitality. The energy once spent on maintenance returns to its source. It fuels clearer thought, steadier action, deeper silence. In this silence, identity no longer needs constant reinforcement from without. It stands on its own ground, not rigid, not defensive, but rooted. Rooted in the knowledge that you are responsible for your perceptions, your desires, your responses. No more, no less. That knowledge is freedom of the plainest kind. Freedom from the illusion that happiness or worth can be negotiated with the external world. As the 30th day draws to its close, sit again in the quiet where you began. Feel the residue of the month, the small scars of discomfort, the faint warmth of reclaimed ground, the steady pulse of a mind that has learned to govern itself. There is no end point here, no finish line, only continuation. The work does not end because the 30 days are done. It simply changes form from conscious effort to deeper habit, from deliberate practice to ordinary way of being. Tomorrow you will wake and face the same choice, to turn inward or to scatter outward. The choice will be easier, not because the world has grown kinder, but because you have grown less divided. Carry this not as a trophy, but as a quiet commitment. Return to the inventory when the old reflexes stir. Return to the pause when impulse rises. Return to the question, what is mine to govern? When confusion arrives, return without drama, without self-congratulation, without expectation of reward. The path is the same tomorrow as it was today. Only your footing is surer. And if in the years ahead the discipline ever wavers, remember this stretch of 30 days not as a peak, but as proof that return is always possible, that the ground can be reclaimed, that the man who once lived as a reflection can learn, slowly and without spectacle, to live as himself, continue. Not for applause, not for transformation, but because a life aligned with its own reason is the only life worth the name. Keep watch over yourself, Majid. The watching itself is the practice. Built by Stoicism remains here for the days when the watching grows heavy, when the quiet questions return and need a steady voice to meet them. Come back to this space whenever the pull outward grows strong again. The door is open, the tone unchanged, calm, clear, and unforgivingly honest. The work goes on.